Here's your complete start sit guide to every running back in every single matchup of week 9. If you want to have a statistical advantage every single week moving forward, hit that subscribe button and like the video if you want some good luck in fantasy this week, because we all need to guarantee a win in week 9. But I'll let these videos speak for themselves. Starting it off in the S tier, we're going to have Kyren Williams against the Seattle Seahawks, who allow the 5th most points to opposing running backs isolated this year. They allow 5.3 yards per carry as well. Kyren gets a really good utilization in the red zone, and now with Puka and cutback, that's only going to get better with the offense moving and being more versatile with those guys, keeping them on the field. Following that, with Saquon Barkley as the RB3 in the S tier, coming off another 100-yard game. The only problem is that Jalen Hurts is stealing some rushing touchdowns and upside from him. We kind of expected that coming into the year, but regardless, he gets a matchup against the Jaguars, who are top 3 in every single stat allowed to every position: quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. There is no doubt that the Eagles will be up, and will be up by a good amount in this game, which should lead to a more run-heavy script for Saquon, and hopefully a higher percentage of chances to get in that end zone. But continuing in that S tier, we're going to take Bijan Robinson over 23 points a game in his last 3. He gets great usage in the receiving game, and now he gets another top 5 matchup here against the Cowboys, who are allowing 18 fantasy points a game to the running back position isolated. Alvin Kamara is next here. He's playing the Panthers, which... that's enough said. I don't really have to go any more into the numbers. The Panthers are allowing the #1 most points to opposing running backs. He's torched them earlier this season for 22 fantasy points on only a 50% snap share in week 1. Now he gets to face them again, and Derek Carr should be playing this week, which is going to give the offense that much more potential and probably make them blow out the Panthers even more than they should with Spencer Rattler. But dropping it down to the A tier, we're going to have Devon Achane, Gibbs, and Derrick Henry. In every single game this year that Tua has been healthy, Devon Achane has had a minimum of 6 receptions in each one of those games. That gives him about a floor of 10 fantasy points, which is very, very safe. Add on the fact that he's an extremely efficient running back and a positive matchup against the Bills, which is one of the best. Fire him up, as well as Jahmyr Gibbs, who's starting to take over, honestly. 7 touchdowns in 7 games so far and averaging 6 yards per carry. Now he gets a matchup against the Packers, which is a little bit more neutral. It's not necessarily an insanely positive one, but if we do have Malik Willis at quarterback, you can imagine the Lions will absolutely blow out the Packers, leading to an even more run-heavy script and probably higher signs for touchdowns for him. Then we have Derrick Henry, who gets a matchup against the Broncos, which is one of the tougher ones, but you cannot sit him. He's had 7 straight games with a touchdown. Following that with Aaron Jones and Jonathan Taylor in this tier. With the loss of the Vikings left tackle, it does definitely hurt Aaron Jones and his potential in the run game for yards after contact, but they should stay in a positive run game against the Colts, which they do have Joe Flacco starting this week, which is going to keep the game closer, but their defense in general isn't necessarily amazing in stopping running back. Top 10 in big plays allowed to the running backs and in fantasy points per game. But on the other side, with no Richardson, the touchdown upside is going to be increased because he's not going to be stealing them at the goal line. The check down number is going to be increased because he's not just going to rush it himself. And it is a tougher matchup against the Vikings. They have one of the best run stopping defenses, but I trust this offense a little bit more with Joe Flacco, and he's still a start regardless of the matchup. And then we're going to follow that with Kenneth Walker. Walker has had at least a minimum of 4 receptions a game in 4 out of his last 5. And his main issue has been the utilization in the run game, but the Seahawks have just been getting blown out in the beginning of the games, not allowing them to really utilize Kenneth Walker the way they want. He's definitely going to see more than 9 carries. Against the Rams, it's a way easier defense. The touches should be there on top of the receiving upside as well. We're firing him in our starting lineup. So starting with the B tier, we're going to have James Cook very easily above the rest of these guys, followed by Montgomery and Swift. Cook finally looks healthy. In the past few weeks coming out of his injury, he hasn't really looked 100%. Last week proved that he's perfectly fine now. He's been seeing more red zone utilization than ever before, and he has a career high with touchdowns. And with the addition of Amari Cooper allowing this offense to move even more, there's more upside for those touchdowns and just general yardage, with the Bills probably being up in these games. Now he gets a matchup against the Dolphins. The last time these two teams met was in week 2, and he hung 28.5 fantasy points on them. I love him this week. Starting out with Montgomery next. Technically, he is the RB2 on his own team, but even then, he doesn't play it like that. He gets a touchdown in every single game. 11 out of his last 12 games, he's had a touchdown. The Lions are a run-heavy team. It does not matter who they play. Jared Goff can honestly take the night off this week, especially if we're not going to have Jordan Love here. They should be blowing this team out. But Swift is going to be next. Unfortunately, he is at the mercy of Caleb Williams. Luckily, it doesn't matter as much on the ground as it does in the past. He's still averaging 5.4 yards per carry. Since week 4, he completely started to turn his season around. Now he faces the Cardinals, which is an extremely positive matchup, so I'd be starting him where I can. The upside is just going to be a little lower if you have Roschon Johnson or backup centers coming in and taking red zone touches. That should not continue. Last week was an absolute embarrassment for them. I think they should know better than to stick it with somebody that can actually run the ball. Josh Jacobs is going to be next year. He is questionable coming into this week, so be aware of his situation, but he does get an extremely tough matchup here against the Lions run defense, who has been tough, but a little bit easier to that position ever since Aiden Hutchinson has been injured, so it's not impossible. Regardless of the quarterback situation for him and the Packers, he will find success. We're going to follow that with James Conner, who gets a matchup against the Bears, which is negative towards running back points allowed. The good news is that in the 6 games that the Cardinals have kept close within a touchdown, James Conner has scored 14 or more fantasy points in 100% of them. We're going to follow that up with Brian Robinson, who gets a matchup against the New York Giants, allowing the #1 most yards per carry to running backs. They are also positive in fantasy points allowed, top 10 as well. The last time these two teams met in week 2, Brian Robinson hung 133 rushing yards on them on only 17 carries. That's a pretty good yard per carry mark. Dropping it down to the C tier though, we're going to have Tony Pollard, Kareem Hunt, and J.K. Dobbins. Any running back that plays the Patriots defense, you're going to be starting them. The Jets, they went for 112 and a touchdown. The Jaguars went for 156 and 2 touchdowns. The Texans, 185 and 2 touchdowns. The Dolphins, 184 and a touchdown. The 49ers, 123 and a touchdown. Every single one of the matchups that they play against, the running backs go absolutely insane. It's a top 3 matchup, and I'm starting them against this Patriots defense. It does not matter, and he does get a great amount of usage in the receiving game, which is going to keep him even higher. There is a chance that Tyjae Spears does miss this game, which I will get into later in the video. Looking at J.K. Dobbins, he does get a tougher one against the Browns defense, which is one of the most negative as far as game script goes. The level of opportunities, though, are elite for him, though. His touches, 100% there on the ground and in the air, which is really good for PPR leagues with the pass-catching upside. Following that with Chuba Hubbard, Ramondre, and Chase Brown. Chuba's ranking may change depending on the health of Jonathan Brooks. He might play. It looks like he won't, but he does get a matchup against the Saints, who allow the 7th most points to opposing running backs and 17.3 fantasy points per game. He does take a hit with Bryce Young at quarterback, but he's still going to be starting him if we don't have Jonathan Brooks. And then Ramondre Stevenson is next in a tougher matchup against the Jets here. They didn't have a ton of success against them last time they played, but he does see a ton of touches. Last week, he had a season high in 81% of the snaps and touches as well. We don't know what to expect. He could be the RB1 workhorse one week. There could be a 2 running back by committee. Until that uncertainty goes away, it's going to be harder to move him up in these rankings. We're going to be following that with Chase Brown, though. 5 touchdowns in the last 5 games. Unfortunately, he did split the backfield last week with Zach Moss, and Zach Moss saw more snaps than he did. But on a good note, Chase Brown is the more efficient running back, and he saw more usage on the snap share that he did get. So that number of time on field doesn't necessarily matter for him as much as you'd think. We'll finish this tier with Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. Baker Mayfield is still a pass-first quarterback, and the volume is going to be there. We saw that from last week, even with his top 2 wide receiver options not in the offense. They were both able to drop over 15 fantasy points last week, so the upside is definitely going to be there when they do lean on them, which they will. But they do get the #1 toughest matchup against the Chiefs defense this week, who it's kind of a nightmare, but with the amount of usage these guys get in the receiving game, they're still going to be started, but just a little bit lower in the rankings, which is why I have them where they are. But dropping it down to the D tier, we're going to be starting with Javonte Williams, Alexander Mattison, and Rico Dowdle. Javonte, he does get a very tough matchup against the Ravens defense, allowing the 2nd least points to opposing running backs. But as long as he gets usage in the receiving game, which he has been able to do all year for the most part, he's going to be serviceable. You can't really rely on a touchdown, though. 1, in a negative game script where they're probably going to have to pass a lot more. And 2, when you have Bo Nix taking rushing touchdowns in the red zone, as well as Jaleel McLaughlin half the time as well. So you can't bank on that. It is a little bit more risky in this matchup, but he has been proving himself. He has been efficient, and he does get usage in the receiving game. So following that up with Alexander Mattison, he's averaged 18 touches a game over his last 4 and has been able to average 10 fantasy points a game in that stretch, despite having the toughest running back schedule in that 4-week span. So that's really good numbers for him, and he dominates in routes run out of the backfield, touches literally everything. Zamir White does not exist at this point in the season, so he's a fine start. We're following that up with Rico Dowdle. Everybody was worried about the Cowboys bringing up Dalvin Cook into this offense. The only reason they did that is because Rico was dealing with an illness that wasn't really disclosed till Sunday, and nobody really knew about it. With that being said, Dowdle should now be fully healthy, and Mike McCarthy has said to the media that he wants to get Rico Dowdle more touches, and he is one of the more trustworthy coaches. But following that with Nick Chubb, he's been increasing his touches every week, and now in a better, more high upside offense without Deshaun Watson. The plus side is that he's not going to get touchdowns stolen, vultured at the goal line, because Jameis Winston doesn't really run the ball like that. And he will get more upside in the receiving game because running quarterbacks statistically just take off and run for yardage instead of checking the ball down to the running back. So that's a plus for him. But until he gets back to a 90% snap percentage, I don't think it's too strong to start him just yet, but definitely a guy that we want to keep an eye on. But then we're going to have Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby tied here together. ETN seems like a bit more of a risk to reward kind of guy, but he is trending in the right direction towards playing this week, and ETN hasn't been really that bad in his healthy games. The Jaguars just are going to have to lean on him and Tank Bigsby more without these wide receiver options. Christian Kirk is definitely injured. Gabe Davis might be out. Brian Thomas Jr. might be out. More information will be coming on that later, at least at the time of this video. But moving down to the next tier, we're going to have Devin Singletary, who I may end up be moving up depending on the health of Tyron Tracy. He is dealing with a concussion. At the time of this recording, he hasn't been ruled in. He hasn't been ruled out. If he is out, I would be starting Devin Singletary in a matchup against the Commanders, who is a very positive one, but to be fair, they have been a little bit better against stopping the run as of recently. And then we're going to be going with Raheem Mostert, Tyjae Spears, and Austin Eckler. With Raheem Mostert, he gets a bump with Tua being in this offense. Obviously, they stay on the field more, they move the ball, and it's just positive all around, and he does get more touchdown upside because they will be in the red zone a lot more, especially against a Bills defense, which is more positive. Unfortunately, he is going to be a little bit more touchdown dependent with Devon Achane playing as good as he is and taking all of the receiving work. Similar with Tyjae Spears, he gets a matchup against the Patriots, which is positive again, but he is going to be more touchdown dependent to be that play, and he is questionable. He might not be playing this week. Eckler gets an upside matchup here in the receiving game against the Giants, but on the other side of that, he does run just about the same amount of routes as Brian Robinson per game, so he doesn't really have an edge in that sense. I have him projected from anywhere to 6 to 9 fantasy points. Nothing absolutely crazy though. Followed by Tyler Algier. Zach Moss could put up some numbers, but probably will get more rushing upside than fantasy points in decent matchups. Then we have Zach Charbonnet, who does get usage where it matters in the receiving game and in the red zone. Again, it just depends on how much of those looks he actually will be getting. In a matchup against the Rams, it should be a closer game, so they probably won't have to lean on him as much, but we're going to follow that with Roschon Johnson, who again is another touchdown or bust player, but actually has upside with that because he is the primary goal line running back for the Bears. And we're going to be following that out with some G-tier running backs that are secondary guys with Kendre Miller, Jerome Ford, Ray Davis, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Emmanuel Wilson. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I will see you in the wide receiver tiers coming tomorrow. Make sure not to miss that.